I'm going to start today's episode with probably the worst joke you're going to hear this week, if not this month. Um, Here it is. When is enough enough? When it's an egg in France. You see what I did there? In French, an egg is enough. Okay, so behind my terrible joke is serious question. Like, when is enough enough? Have you ever achieved something that maybe you'd wanted for years, only to enjoy it for minutes or hours or even a couple of days? Maybe you hit the target. Maybe you complete the project. Maybe you land the important client. Maybe you build a business to a certain level, sell the business. Maybe you get the car, you get promoted. But then almost immediately or very soon, your mind quietly moves the finish line. And usually without realizing it, it goes, okay, what's next? Now, I've noticed this pattern in so many high performers, achievers over the years. And I suppose, first of all, I recognize it in myself, and I've worked with enough people now at this point in my career who look incredibly successful from the outside, but privately feel that they're not quite there, that they feel they're not ever quite enough. They're never doing enough. They're never achieving enough. And that makes, I suppose, their experience of life not all it could be. Now, if that resonates, I think today's episode will at least explore it a bit for you. Now, I call this the achiever's trap or the achiever's Achilles heel, where achievement quietly becomes your source of worth, of self-worth. And not deliberately, but it kind of happens by accident. I remember years ago, somebody had said to me that a lot of high performers confuse net worth with self-worth. And it's the same kind of idea. If your net worth is caught up with your self-worth, well, then what happens if your net worth or when it takes a hit or if it's removed? For a lot of people, I saw this during the crash of 08, 9, 10. You really see people's identity, their self-worth is caught up with the amount of wealth that they believe they have or that they have. And when it's gone, some people can't live with that, tragically. So the mind, even not in that extreme, but in a general sense, the mind can kind of create a deal with you that you probably didn't fully consciously buy into. And the deal is a version of, okay, I'm going to finally feel successful and happy when X happens, or when I do that. That could be when the business reaches this level, when I earn a certain amount of money, when I'm recognized in a certain way, when I lose weight, when I gain weight, when I finish this project, when I achieve this result. But what's the problem with that? The problem is that the moment we arrive at that end, the mind, because of its nature, changes the deal. It will always move the goalposts again and again. So what that means then is success is always waiting somewhere in the future. It's never actually here. It's always over there. And here's the irony. I think many of the people that I work with, that I help, they don't really have an achievement problem. And I suppose I recognize this because I saw it in myself first. What most of those people have actually is a receiving problem. Receiving and integrating the feeling that they don't need to be there to feel a certain way. They become brilliant at striving and achieving, but they've forgotten how to receive what they've already created, all of the great things in their life. A lack of appreciation then comes in, a lack of gratitude. No matter what they have, they don't realize they just don't feel the way that they thought they would feel. Now, if you think back for yourself over the last 12 months, how many things have you achieved that maybe you've barely acknowledged? Could be problems you've solved, obstacles you've overcome, people you've helped, skills you've developed, conversations that you handled well, or ways that you've grown as a leader or as a person. But what does the mind often do? It can kind of go, yeah, but I didn't do this, this, and this, or yeah, but I should have done more, or I'm still behind where I think I should be, or I'm nowhere near where I want to be, actually. And to me, that's the achiever's trap. No, you're locked in your mind. And it's a good example, I think, of when I say to people, listen, you're not your mind, you have one. I know a lot of the time people think, I don't really know what that means, or that's kind of silly. But this is what I mean, is that you're locked in your mind. The mind, by its nature, always wants more. It's what I call the more monster. But that's part of the achiever's trap. And it's not that you've actually failed. It's just that your mind has become conditioned to overlook what is already here. Now, I have so many stories in this area with people over the years, but I remember a specific client who had built an incredible business, highly respected, good team, making a genuine impact. And from the outside, most people would have looked at their life and thought they've made it. But as we talked, and the reason that they were talking to me was all they could see was what hadn't been done, like everything that still needed to be fixed, that wasn't right, mistakes that had been made, everything that wasn't perfect. And I remember one of the questions that I asked them, we had many conversations, but one of the questions was, okay, look, when was the last time you actually stopped and just recognized everything that you've built and all of the impact and value that you've added to your life and to other people's lives? And initially, he's like, yeah. Let's move on. But I said, no. Like, I'm talking about really recognized it and actually, like, received it, like, acknowledged it in yourself. Well, that would have got silence. Because when they were honest, it just said they couldn't remember. And so, to me, that's not a success problem. That's a different type of problem. That's a problem of your relationship with success. Now, I'm going to give you a simple exercise that I think is worth doing. I'm going to call it your achievements inventory. So if you set aside, say, 15 minutes, take a blank sheet of paper and divide it into 3 columns. And the first column on the left, right, okay, what have I done? And in that column, list all of your tangible achievements, the projects, completed, the goals reached, the problem solved. List as much as you can over your career, your life. In the second or the middle column, question then is, who have I become? Who have you become with where you're at right now? So maybe you're more resilient, maybe you're calmer, braver, more insightful, maybe you're a better listener, more patient, more decisive. Again, you're focusing on the positives. You're never fully there. You're never going to achieve perfection, but you have become some things that you weren't before. And very often that could be the greatest achievement of all, is like who you have become. And then the third column on the right, the question at the top is, who has benefited because of my growth? You, your family, your team, your clients, your friends. Think about the people whose lives are better because you've become who you are. And then just notice what your lovely mind does. Like, does it try and dismiss it? Does it try and minimize the impact? Does it immediately say, yeah, you did that, but you didn't do this, or that didn't happen? And this particular exercise is not about trying to falsely boost your confidence or ego. I suppose it's a simple way to try and train your mind to recognize reality. Because if your mind can't receive today's success, no matter what circumstances you're in, even if, you've lost a business or lost a partner through death or divorce or separation, or had damage to your health, there still is going to be achievements, things that your mind perhaps hasn't really recognized or received. And if your mind can't receive today's success, well, then it won't know how to receive tomorrow's either. Really important inner skill, an inner CEO skill. If you can imagine climbing a mountain and you finally reach the summit, and this is like an age-old metaphor, you get to the summit, but instead of turning around and taking in the view and appreciating what you've done, you immediately start looking for the next mountain. And eventually then you stop experiencing the joy of achievement altogether. Life becomes one climb after another, one mountain after another. And it's not even because you're ambitious, it's because you've forgotten how to pause and how to squeeze the juice out of the orange. As usual, I want to give you a couple of questions maybe to sit with if you're open to it. In the context of what we're talking about, where have you quietly moved the goalposts in your own life? Like, where have you delayed your appreciation for what you've done and who you are and who you've become, the impact you've made? Where have you moved the goalposts in your own life? And second question is, over the last year, what have you actually created that you've never really allowed yourself to acknowledge? Maybe, as I said, it's going getting through a tough period. Maybe it's providing for your family. Maybe it's much greater than that. Who knows? You decide. And then the last question is, if you truly appreciated how far you've already come, regardless of the lack of perfection, how might you approach the next stage of your journey differently? What would you bring in that would be different? It's funny, I'll probably talk about this in future podcasts, about the word ambition. I've never believed ambition is a problem. I think healthy ambition is a fantastic thing. It's a gift. But I think compulsive striving is something very different. I think it's unhealthy. Healthy ambition, I think, expands your life. I think compulsive striving quietly steals it. And compulsive striving, I think, is way more common than people realize. Learning to appreciate where you are doesn't make you lose your edge. In fact, I think the opposite happens. When you stop chasing your worth in the way I've described, in my experience, you free up more energy, more creativity, and more wisdom to help you for what comes next. And then that way, I guess what I'm saying is success to me isn't just about reaching the next milestone. It's about developing the capacity to receive and enjoy and appreciate the one you've already reached. That to me is part of true success. And, your next level of success may not come from achieving more. It might actually come from finally allowing yourself to experience what you've already created, what you've already achieved. And look, I don't know, if you can't enjoy what you've created, what you've achieved, what's the point of it all anyway? Surely that's worth considering. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.